Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Bald Explorer reading this afternoon. Just had a few technical issues in the studio here. Not quite sure. Just making sure that everything's working and you're receiving me okay. It kept crashing. The system kept crashing, but I think it's stable. But we'll see. Can you hear me all right, everybody? That would be grand. Welcome along. It's Friday, the last reading of this week. It's the 14th of August 2020, and we are reading The Wisdom of the Fields. And I see that we have John F., Lee Lawson, Audrey Forbes Hamilton, Turbo Stream, and Steve G out there. And hopefully you are receiving me. Not that I can... I'm not getting any messages. Should I be getting messages? I feel I ought to be getting messages. Can you hear me, Mother? Ah, there we go. It must be... Yes, we can hear you. Thank you very much. That's all I needed to know. Otherwise, I couldn't proceed. Because I don't... sometimes you do this and you have no idea whether it's actually working or not. Can you? Fine. Great. Okay. So it's all going well. Let me just change that to over there so that doesn't distract me. Brilliant. Before we get going, I was reading in the Killing of the Countryside, which is a book by Graham Harvey, which is a really interesting book, and I thoroughly recommend people having a go at this if you've got nothing better to do with your lives. This was written in 1997 or something like that. So not completely up to date, but not too far away. And in it, Graham Harvey, who's talking about the killing of the countryside, and it goes into a huge amount of detail about it all, he references one HJ Massingham. And in a chapter called Chapter 8, The Riches We Squandered, he says, the author HJ Massingham, an astute commentator on rural affairs in the 1930s and 40s, warned frequently that the industrialization of agriculture would lead to catastrophe. In his book, The Wisdom of the Fields, this one, he tells of a wartime visit to a friend's farm in West Somerset and meeting peasants farming small acreages of the foothills on those two great ranges, the Quantocks and the Brendans. He used the term peasant. His use of the term peasant, rather, implies no disdain. On the contrary, it is a mark of respect. In Massingham's view, country people, peasants in particular, were the repository of an ageless wisdom which the nation abandons at its peril. Among those he met in Somerset's hillock and dingle country was a certain Mr. Rowe and his wife. There is no further identification, and on little more than 4 acres of steeply sloping land, this couple grew enough food to feed a small hamlet, all without the aid of chemicals. Their crops included strawberries, £120 produced in 1924, early main crop potatoes, orchard fruits, plus a great diversity of vegetables that many a grower with 400 acres of fat and level land. In addition, they grew enough grass, fodder, crops and flowers to support a pony, 130 chicken, including 30 pullets, goats, 6 ewes, a lamb and breeding sow, with a litter of 8 and 30 hives of bees. Massingham's comments that their crops were of superlative quality and their animals in perfect health. Husbandry such as this would save old England from starvation and feed 100 million people when the edifice of super-industrialization, international trade and exploitation of national resources came tumbling down. And Graham Harvey goes on to say that you could calculate this forward, that those techniques there would be quite easy to sustain even the population if it was to get up to something like 10 million in this country or something. I can't remember exactly. But what he was basically saying is Massingham was right about mixed farming, being a way forward. And do you know, I've been doing a bit of research, and I was watching, somebody recommended me to listen to a podcast earlier today with a chap called Patrick Holden, who's a dairy farmer, and he's also the CEO of, the name of the trust now has just escaped me, but it's something to do with like the real food and stuff. And he's a real farmer talking, and he's trying to promote mixed farming. And I'm realizing that it's not just me stumbling across some old books that has this outlook. People are out there with trusts and promotions and doing it, and it's not just me. Sometimes you feel like you've found something out and you're the lone voice. And he says that this is the frightening bit. He says that the stuff you buy in the supermarkets, which Colin Trudge was talking about, and in a different book Graham Harvey was talking about, has no nutritional value at all, especially the salads and things like that. Absolutely no nutritional value at all, and it's a blight. And we've got to go back to buying from local suppliers who have passion for farming. And there is movements for this. And it vindicates all I've said, where in the past people have said, oh, just because you read a book, you think you know everything. Anyway, got that off my chest. Hello to Linda Kane, to Morton Lewis, to TurboStream and Diana Rolfe. Hello, Richard. The Allotment Channel with Sean James Cameron, even. Sorry. Christian Soldier, Ed Loud, Lee Lawson, I think I've said, Linda Kane, I said, Jim Mugford. Hi all, love the show, glad that you could do the walking tours again. Hopefully you can go into buildings. Hot here in Nova Scotia. Enjoy the day. Sustainable Food Trust, that's the guy. Yeah, the Sustainable Food Trust. Fascinating bloke. My meal will be from my allotment today. There we go. You see, this is the thing. But he's arguing that we've just got to I wanted to get on with the reading, but he argues, and this is what I said in my podcast. Anybody who got the Naked Englishman the other day, not today's, yesterday's, said we've got the power to go to the supermarkets and demand the food that we want, because they will supply the food we want. If we don't, they'll keep giving us crap. We keep saying, oh, we just want the cheapest food. But if we want local food, we've got to say, get us the food from the local farms. Because I've just done a search of local farm shops, and really, there isn't any. Not really. There's a couple, and they're okay, but they're not anything. And the reason there's no bloody farm shops is there's no small farms needing an outlet. We've got to get those small farms back with the marketplace for them to sell their stuff. And I'm sure that some of the big, not the very big, but some of the middle farms would switch back to mixed farming and give us proper sustainable food if the market was there. And we are the market. We've got to do the work. Earth could support 16 billion instead of needing 4 Earth to sustain a future. Yes. My meal will be... Oh, you read that. I'm listening to my great-granddad's grandmother's clock. Tick-tocking, most relaxing indeed. Well, turn that off and listen to me. Right, we're on section 2 of chapter 3. This is a chapter called The County Workman. This brings me back to my conversation at the gate with the small farmer and the carpenter builder. The mass execution of country industries following the Industrial Revolution first exalted mass over individual production, then the dealer over the producer, and finally finance over all. In several villages, for instance, the population declined by 90%, while the closing down of the stone-grinding country mills, some 20,000 of them, alone impoverished or put out of action smithying, carpentry, sack mating, the casting of metal and brass for replacements, leather tanning for belting, mill writing, stone dressing, and timbering. So in other words, you cut one industry and all the suppliers of that are decimated. As we talked, I could see how it had happened with his family and that family of my own village, and the family in my own village. Old Pierce was a wheelwright, but the demand for wagons and carts had so dwindled that he was forced to turn himself into a coal merchant. His son, inheriting his father's craftsmanly bent, became a smith in the days when arable was falling down to rough pasture. There being no farm horses left to be shod, he took to carrying his father's coals. The carpenter had changed to a jobbing builder and had entered the maelstrom of cutthroat competition between the local builders for tenders at the price of either of sweated labour or shoddy materials, or both. From making farm gates, he took to running up council houses. Their dry rot, draughts, flimsiness, the doubling of the heat in the summer and the cold in the winter, he described with pert bitterness, very unusual in a craftsman. How often, and with but slight deviations in circumstances, could this tale be repeated? Many a letter I've had from ex-craftsmen whose prefix was none of their doing, and who longed to be rid of it. I quote one of these. Leaving the village school at 13, I followed in Cobbett's footsteps for a time by working as a crow starver come ploughboy. Later, I was apprenticed to a local wheelwright for 6 years. During this period, the crafts suffered a gradual eclipse, with the results that, at the end of it, I was forced to seek a living elsewhere and in another direction. In passing, I would like to say that few tasks of the world demand the same individual skill and craftsmanship and give the same satisfaction when done as that required to make a wheel. He entered the motor trade and so led an urban life for 20 years. Such men never forget the trade they once pursued and the rural environment in which they worked. Their lives have been permanently dislocated, and they can never be other than misfits in an urban society. Here is another, but this man escaped. Sorry, just slurping tea. And for the benefit of the listeners to this who are just listening to the podcast after the event, hello and welcome. But every now and again you'll hear me stop maybe to take a slurp because you can't see what I'm doing. So do forgive me. This is the letter the other man sent. I am a countryman. Birth, breeding and inclination all make the town repulsive to me. As a boy, I was encouraged to try something better than farming or farm work. I did, and by becoming a local government officer and working in an office, plus 3 years soldiering in the last war, I managed to ruin my eyes and my health. Then I realised I was trying to force a countryman into town. I threw it up, bought a little bit of wood and a wooden bungalow. By that time I had no money to farm with and no health to work with. That is, in the sense of taking a job. Well, it turned out for the best. Things usually do. I became a freelance writer, and now, after 15 years, I still have my bit of land. I can make a fairish living, and above all, I live in the country and have time to get onto my land and take part in local affairs. I can even claim to be something of a craftsman. I've taught myself, or perhaps you would say I've remembered, how to lay a hedge, fell a tree, graft, prune and crab. I can't thatch, but hope to have a shot at it next year. I have plastered. I am cleaning some hazels for lathes, but so far have used metal lathing as an urgent job. I have built a brick arch and open hearth, put up a chimney, laid drains, 101 odd jobs which are worth doing for the doing, and I have made a good many of my own tools. cleaving axe, an improved hedge slasher, a Hollywood maul or beadle, and a weather vane complete, including a man, horse and plough cut from sheet iron. Men like these might be the leaven to leaven our industrial lump, but the weight of their age is against them, and year by year they become fewer and fewer. The farmer took up the tale with an account of the new thatching machines which produce an article like a sheet of matting that lasts for a year and wastes more straw than it uses. Both these men spoke with derision of, and a chilly scorn for, the profit-hunting and expediency of modern methods that took the very sunshine out of the day and made the living of it very weary, stale, flat and unprofitable. I edged them away from such talk to their memories, and instantly the east wind went out of the atmosphere and the sun warmed us, and the prettiness of life was strained off as though in a sieve. The carpenter builder described how he had made oak window frames and how the moulding was done. Once he had been a pargeter. Pargeting is traditional in my neighbourhood, though rare, but from a mould, not by pricking and combing the damp surface. He had done wheelwrighting too, taking down the yellow and red-hooped raved Woodstock wagon used with the more local make in these parts, and rebuilding it, but leaving out the chamfering and dishing of the wheels. He didn't grind his own colours, as the older wheelwrights used to do, and he took days at the job where they were wont to take weeks. This was not because they were slow workers, but because they did much more to the wagon as artists, who scamping, by which this man had to live, was unknown. He, like so many others, had lived in a transitional period between the unity of art and trade, beauty and use, and the segregation of art from commercialism. Country memory still enshines the reputation of great wheelwrights. One of them was Pike of Tinhead, dead for many years. I was moving about in Wiltshire with a very small party engaged on a farming survey. We came to a very lonely farm on the high downs near Imber, which, as I knew it years ago, was one of the loveliest and loneliest places in the world. And there, in a cart shed, was a wagon of Pike of Tinhead. The farmer was a yeoman, and because he was a yeoman, he had in his yard a wheat stack on staddles, joined by heavy timbers. There were as many as 6 staddles on one side of the stack. At least I can imagine nobody else but a yeoman straddling his rick. And I thought, and though I saw thousands of other ricks, this was the only one that was staddled. Memory again. This yeoman did so because his forefathers had always done so. And why? Because they had discovered by experience that it was the proper way to aerate the rick and keep the rats and mice away from it. I wonder how many tons of wheat and thousands of pounds are annually lost by building ricks on the ground, in other words, by loss of memory. This farmer had had this wagon for 60 years and still found it handy in a hayfield. His father had been a friend of Jacob Pike, and both were buried in the churchyard of the great church at Eddington, where Alfred beat the Danes. I examined the wagon. The raves over the great hind wheels had been lost and replaced by straight timbers, while the intricate undercarriage had been patched up by odd bits of unseasoned wood that brutally contrasted with the wonderful chamfering, hatching and carving of the original timbers. The former lettering and red and blue colouring had almost faded out, but the double shafts for the thill horse, and the vellies, the great hubs, the middle staffs, the wonderful network of carved and perfectly fitting timbers of the undercarriage. There was enough of it all, this left to reveal what a work of art this waggon had once been. It was the most extravagant mixture of beauty and shoddy, of solidness and flimsiness, of devotion and makeshift, I think, that I've ever seen. The continuity had been broken, and this yeoman had had the pain of propping up the old waggon like this because he couldn't afford to do anything else. His masters, the financiers and the politicians, had seen to that. When Jacob Pike had built that waggon, the country memory was still intact. When those spars and planks had been nailed on, the tradition was gone, and there stood the old waggon suffering from loss of memory. And that waggon was the whole of our countryside. Just take a slight pause there to have a glass of water. Hedge slasher. Have you got your hedge slasher, Morton Lewis? Imber, the deserted village on the Salisbury Plain. I wonder if that is the same one. This is 1940s, isn't it? I don't know. Could be. Right, this is section 3 of this chapter, or part 3 of this chapter. Yet if given the faintest breeze of encouragement, how quickly the sails of country memory fill again and the old creativity energy stirs. I'll give an example of the former from the paper of a friend, the local historian, Dr. W.G. Hoskins, called The Fields of Wigston Manor. Is it W.G. Hoskins who wrote the famous... Is it W.G. Hoskins? The Shape of the Landscape or something. What's his book called? The Making of the Landscape. Is it The Making of the Landscape? Anyway, I've got it on my... I know where it is on the other room. Anyway, this one's called The Fields of Wigston Manor. Herein he interprets nearly 150 field names from this one parish founded 1400 years ago. Perhaps the most interesting thing about these, and so all field names, is the sharp break in their continuity after the enclosures. The Wigston field names can be dated. The earliest records of them from the mid-13th century to the time of the Enclosure Award, and all of the ancient names vanish after the enclosure of this parish in 1766. Dr. Hoskins gave me a lecture on these names of the village, but, as he wrote to me, the knowledge that these old fields, lanes, paths, copses, and so forth had once all their own individual names had passed utterly out of the village mind, and the subject was remote to them, as though I had proposed to talk about Chinese pottery. Yet when the lecture was given, the older men gradually unearthed from their minds the faintest recollections of some of these old names, or rather the folk memory of them, spoken nearly 50 years ago. His experience, he added, is that all villages there is a vast unformed interest. Sorry, not uniformed. Unformed. Sorry, brain interpreting words that are not there. Or in all villages there is this vast unformed interest in the past history of the place and a desire to know more about it, but people don't know how to bridge the chasm between them and the last remnants of the civilization that was destroyed in the late 18th century. The field name, just like the wagon building, was a particular and local sign of certain permanent values, now suppressed or overlain. Occasionally, however, other signs of them in country workmanship survive intact. Turning over the pages of a farming journal, I came upon the photograph of a thatched rick built by A.G. Welling's on a farm at Wickham near Scarborough. The rick looked nearly 30 feet high, and the springing of the coggins was so perfectly combined with the thatched roof lines that there was no interruption of them at the eaves. The stack rose in a sweeping arc until a foot or so from the footridge. It then dipped inwards, making a perfect ogee curve, and finally tapered off into a fine finial. The actual roof ridge itself dipped from the apices of the gable ends, so that in the whole structure there was no rigid straight line, and the eye passed on from curve to curve. At the gable end, its architecture bore an exact resemblance to the canopy over an Easter sepulchre or a figure in a niche, the only difference being that in the Gothic finial was usually cusped and crocketed. Here was a 14th century decorated chapel, not of ease, but of labour, not in stone, but in straw. We marvel now at such a rick these days. In the past it must have been a familiar to many regions. Was it originally a deliberate imitation of Gothic masonry, or did straw and stone take such forms independently? We know at least that such a masterpiece in straw could not have been built today except as a survival from a time when religion, art and architecture were a related trinity, and the work of the fields was done as much for its own sake as for its money returns. This intactness, when it is humanised by contact with a living man, raises Cobbett from the dead. One day I found myself at Islip and took a walk around the village. It's an outpost of the Oxfordshire Cotswolds, built of the oolite limestone, and descends from a ridge to the banks of a river, the confluence of the Ray and the Cherrell. The High Street winds down to it in a succession of curves, repeating as the Castle Combe in the South Cotswolds round the twists and turns of the stream. Did the builders plan this curvilinear design in deliberate imitation of the river where the High Street ends its journey down the slope? Of course not. How then did they achieve this singular harmony with their surroundings, this crowning of beauty of the natural scene with another and kindred beauty of their own? One can only say that they were unconsciously so attuned to the natural design of the country where they lived and worked that they never went wrong in adding to or completing it. As at Castle Combe, the church is a little retired off the street, about halfway down on a kind of spur or platform of its own, a sort of bay, a resting place on the way down, a withdrawing place from the busy flow of the street, but not too retired from it so that the church shares the life of the winding and flowing street, and yet stands apart from it. When you come to think of it, this mere manner of sighting has an exquisite and symbolic rightness. The curling street, the curling stream at its base, and the tall straight tower of the church dominating the river and buttressing the street proclaim a unity between natural, human and superhuman, which express a world, a universe, and all within the confines of a village. In the churchyard was a Thatcher with his heap of straw, his ladder, his bundle of rods, and all the all the paraphernalia of his trade. That's not the word that's written here, but that's what it means. Appurtenances of his trade, thatching the long low roof of a house forming part of the churchyard wall. He was splitting his withy rods to make his sticks to peg down the thatch. He was an old man, they nearly always are these days, and it was unusual to see him making sticks on the spot. The old story, of course. He could get no assistant. I told him of another case to the east where a Thatcher on an estate who earned over £500 last year was like him, unable to get an assistant, though the estate was prepared to guarantee him a permanent living. As we talked, 2 small boys of the village drifted in to stare. I asked them whether they would like to be Thatchers when they grew up. As I did so, I looked round at this master man of Islip, with his expressive but tranquil face, his easy movements, his confident work, the sweep of the neat thatch, the solid stone buildings, the masterful church tower, the road swinging down the river. The boys shook their heads. What they wanted to do was drive a tractor. These days it would be play on a computer game, no doubt. What will happen when the old men are too old to hold the rural structure together? Well, I think we know that now, don't we? This is 80 years ago, so we can kind of guess what's going to happen. The Village Produce Association, that most helpful organisation for reanimating village self-sufficiently, held a very successful demonstration at Islip in the summer of 1945. But our economic system does not favour local self-support. What will happen in the end to the village? Will the sanitary inspector condemn the houses and the planners straighten the crooked road and build 2 rows of portal boxes on either side of it? Possibly, but nothing this age may do can alter the truth that this scene, the road like the river, meeting the river like the road, the church a little aside and looking on, the comfortable groups of grey stone houses, and the Thatcher using the cornfields to roof them, is a little universe of as near a perfect harmony as man can attain on the earth. That's very true. Ooh, we're on chapter 4. Blimey. There we go. We're just going to read the comments now, if that's all right, whilst I just unclog my eye. This section of rural life folk living in urban land reminds me of Warwickshire. Fish out of water really. He says they will all be gone now. Yes, this is the sad thing. All these fish out of water. The water is still there, but the fish have gone. Imber, the deserted village. Oh, yes. I was looking forward to Imber Day this year. Is there an Imber Day? Is that a day when they allow you to go into Imber on the Salisbury Plain where the army are normally practicing? The Allotment Channel says The Making of the English Landscape is a book by William George Hoskins. The Making of the English Landscape, 1955 book. That's the same. Is it? What did you say he was called? George H. What did I say? G.W., didn't I? W.G. Hoskins. Clearly a different person then. The Making of the English Landscape. Yeah, I think I've actually got 2 copies of it. One is a more picturesque one, and one is just the text. Loss of memory, good phrase. Arts and crafts, says Ed Loud, such as growing and making of things, are society's insurance policies after the war, after disasters and great change. This collective loss of memory is regrettable in the extreme. Quite true. A population that has no link to the land is easier to control, says Senara's Ash Tree. That's very true, because when people are, I mean, what you're saying there is it, and I think you're right, no link to the land, but what you're saying is they have no means of supporting themselves. So people who are dependent on the state and stuff are easily herded about. And that is true. That is why we've got to remember that we actually have the power when it comes to supermarkets of saying, you know, we're not going to buy this tat. We want to buy the good stuff. I have been instructed what high street means, says Jeff Kellison. Had a conversation with him because he didn't quite get. He thought high street was one that was higher up in the town, which can be like in the I'll take the high road, you take the low road. What else have we got here? People talking to each other. I live in the US state of Oklahoma, says Christian Soldier. We have the Williams Tallgrass Prairie Preserve, the largest protected tallgrass prairie remnant left in the world. 720 plant species and over 800 bison. Wow. Right, let's go on to chapter 4 then, whilst we have time is still with us. This is Workmen of the Waterways. All your better deeds shall be in water writ, but this in marble. I don't know what that means. That is a quote from Beaumont and Fletcher. All your better deeds shall be in water writ, but this in marble. Okay, we'll leave that to somebody's higher intelligence to interpret that. Thank you very much. Turning from the country to its inland waters brings another example of a survival still intact. It is Newton Mill on Sling Common near Bell Broughton, or Broughton, in the Clent Valley. There is only where the only cluster of Scythe Mill is left. I learned first of its existence from the colonel of our home guard when I was showing him my collection of country bygones. They kindled his memory to describe to me the workshop. It was a combination of forge and watermill, and the hammer was operated by a roof-high water wheel whose 4 wooden pegs projecting from the axle tipped the great beam on its trestle, so that the hammer at the other end thudded down every 2 seconds upon the anvil. The hammer shaft was an oak beam 10 foot long and a foot square, and weighed over the hammer, and weighted over the hammer, was weighted over the hammer with a heavy stone. The old scythe maker sat in a pendulous chair. Love that word, pendulous. The old scythe maker sat in a pendulous chair, by which I assume he means a rocking chair, like a pendulum going backwards and forwards, attached by a hook to the blackened ceiling of the forge. Just before the tilt hammer struck, he came forward on his toes with the shining and glowing scythe blade in his hands to shape it under a blow. That's amazing. So what he's saying, are you saying that this hammer, which is driven by the water wheel, which is making the big beam go ka-dunk, ka-dunk every 2 seconds or whatever it was, that he, in harmony with that, he's hooked up some sort of rocking chair, so as he comes forward, he can put the scythe, or whatever it is he's working for, underneath the hammer and then back again. That's amazing. In sonorous ring of the hammer could be heard, the sonorous ring of the hammer could be heard from 2 miles away, and to the colonel it was one of the most vivid and cherished memories of his childhood. Yes, you can imagine that would be rather thudded into your memory. Ka-dunk, ka-dunk, ka-dunk. Drive you mad. At first sight, this appears a very primitive contrivance. Actually, of course, it was a machine differing only in one respect from the most elaborate of modern machines. It did not deprive the worker of his personal skill and responsibility. On the contrary, this scythe maker once made scythes not only for Worcestershire and England, but for the whole of Europe, fashioning each finely tempered blade according to the very great variety of regional preferences in shape, length, and curve. A more perfect example could not be of continuity. A more perfect example could not be of continuity between primitive and modern, in which a handicraft was relieved of excessive toil and drudgery without sacrificing the skill and control of the worker, not delegating his independence shaping power to a machine. 2 years after the colonel's visit, I discovered that one of the Bell Broughton scythe mills still exists. Modern science denies miracles, but that a small craftsman should survive in a stone grinding mill and make anything so antiquated as a scythe blade is in an age of combines, mass production and unskilled labour a miracle indeed. The stones are 3, each on an independent countershaft belt, driven from a great pulley wheel and geared up twice in turn from the mill wheel by cogwheels that a friend tells me are 12 feet in diameter. Each grindstone has half a tree trunk set before it, on which the grinder sits astride, with each foot resting on the small platform. Underneath this seat, a pipe takes water to the stone from the mill race. Not only does this fabulous hero grind the scythe blades, 2 of the stones are for roughing and 1 is for finishing, but he actually gets the blades from the next mill down the stream where they're forged, exactly as I have described above. I must apologise for my reading today. Again, I'm just having one of those days where the words jump about. I'm so sorry. It really pains me when I can't read smoothly, and it makes me feel so belittled. This mill is also operated by a single man, and the many different types of blade demand the utmost nicety of a mutual interchange in skill between the 2 mills. They vary not only in length and curvature, but are ground in different ways. There are at least 4 types of these. The shortest, for cutting scrub, is known as the briar. The next, a straightish blade of 2 feet 6 inches, is called Scotch. The third, about 3 foot, Irish. And the last, longer than 3 feet, London grass. Now, why is it called London grass? I can only conjecture that it is the traditional name for the scythe once used by the haymakers who made the annual pilgrimage to the Middlesex meadows, as described in Walter Rose's Good Neighbours. It is better than the excavator's supreme find. It is better than an excavator's supreme find to learn that an industry like this, attached so intimately both in nomenclature and craftsmanship to those obsolete days when use and beauty were one, and men worked for the love of good workmanship, should survive in an era when anything made by skill of hand is regarded as a museum piece. Yes, that's so true, isn't it? It's incredible that we were saying that yesterday about the ubiquitous Amazon warehouses, which have no aesthetic at all, and yet here, so intimately, both in nomenclature, the name of the thing, and the craftsmanship of those obsolete days, where use and beauty were one, and men worked for the love of good workmanship. They were proud, weren't they? They were proud. Whereas anything that people do by hand now is pretty much a museum piece. He's quite right. And that was 80 years ago. One of the most remarkable things about the old country watermills, whether their local power was used for grinding corn or scythes, which is something that I'd never even thought about, that a watermill was there to grind the metal for scythes, or for any other purpose, was the insignificance of the streams whence numbers of them derived that power. One of the most remarkable things about the country watermills was the insignificance of the streams. The mighty works of the Clent Valley were made possible by the motive force of a mere brook. The corn mills that not only supplied their neighbourhoods with the staff of life, but were the navel of the whole rural and regional structure, were as often as not sited on the banks of tributary waters that might have been crossed by a plank bridge. Men in those days made the most of the least amount of enormous development of resources Men in those days made the most of the least until the enormous development of resources consequent upon the invention of cheap mechanical power enabled them to make the least of most. Yes, so I've turned it round on its head there. So it's amazing. Yeah, so in other words, they use just the tiny little bit of power from a stream, and I suppose what you would do in that case is it's down to the mill pond, isn't it? Because you need the force. So you cut a great big pond and the stream fills the pond. It's dammed and it hits the dam at a certain height and or the gates are opened and then the body of water whooshes out enough with the power. But it's only a tiny stream that's feeding that mill pond. I think that's what he means in that case. The Ock, OCK, is one of those satellite streams. In the autumn of 1943, Geoffrey Willoughby, the last owner of the last of its watermills, told me much about the history of this mill and the former fullness of its activities on the banks of the rivulet that winds past Wantage to join the Thames at Abingdon. 6 months later, I heard that he'd been killed. This Letcombe Brook, it is scarcely more, passes the mill below the Iron Age citadel of Letcombe Regis on the great ridgeway that crests the Berkshire Downs from Streatley to Hackpen Hill and Avery. Oh yes, I haven't been to Hackpen Hill, but I was advised to go to it because there's a white horse there, isn't there, at Hackpen Hill. And Avebury, of course, I've been through. Though but a trickle, it was spanned by no fewer than 11 mills 50 years ago. So, what's that? 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 130 years ago in our time. And Willoughby's family had ground corn on his mill since 1596. When I last talked to him, he was, of course, grinding only cattle grist. But in his grandfather's time, the mills of the Ock were supplying Wantage and the numerous hamlets and villages of the neighbourhood with all the flour they needed for the housewives to bake their own bread. Wantage was then called Golden Wantage, possibly because it was the access of a rich corn-growing region that fed the mills that ground the flour that supplied the town and villages with the most nourishing of all foods, whole grain bread. When the mills fell derelict, owing to the trade war of the roller mills at the big ports, the delicate cooperation between the stream, the mills, the corn, the neighbourhood, and the inhabitants thereof was dislocated. The vitality of the whole region was struck by a paralysis from which the revival of corn growing during the great wars of the 20th century was a respite, not a recovery. And now the last of the millers of the Ock has gone. In a few years, the story that he told me of the local self-maintenance, the thriftiness, the abundance that had crowned the labours of the countryman by the waters of that downland runnel will not even be a memory. Once upon a time it had been a source of life and bounty to a whole region. A waggon in the shed next to the mill was dated 1824, is, with the now masterless mill itself, a sole survivor of the days when rural England was still standing on her own feet. I pass on to a letter sent to me and written by another miller forced out of business by the milling combine. His family had been village millers for 4 generations until in his own words, more mechanization, combines, amalgamations had ruthlessly crushed the small man out of existence, and that's still happening, of course. This dispossessed man's father was an accomplished craftsman at dressing his millstones with the thrift. My father loved his mill and the making of flour, and it was a sad day for him when we decided, in face of the severe competition and the public demand for a white loaf, to shut down the business. The sound of the water rushing over the weir formed the background of my childhood days. So attuned were men like this to the rhythm and pulsation of the mill wheel, that his father, while sitting in the mill house, could tell by a slight variation in their tone and pace that a readjustment to the stones was necessary. The bread made from this stone flour was delicious, and I've never tasted better, though by commercial standards it was dark, and so we could not hold the trade. The last of those millstones in this particular county, the last of these stone mills in this particular county, so this miller writes, had its licence taken away by the Ministry of Food. Our bureaucracy kindly takes on the business of the capitalist, combines in eliminating all competition, often giving direct estate jobs into the bargain. This miller then gave me a list of local industries once at work in his village. There were 2 corn mills, 2 fellmongers' yards producing leather and making leggings, gloves, 2 carpenters' shops, 1 real wheelwright shop, 1 forge making agricultural equipment, 1 malt mill, 1 builder's yard, 1 butcher's shop, 1 pork butcher's shop, and 1 bakery. All have been knocked out of business except one of the water mills producing animal foods only, the builder's yard as well, and the bakery. This all happened in his lifetime. He concludes, a master man in those days meant that he was master of his craft, not just an employer of labour. Such has been the history not only of the village, but of all our villages over the whole country. And, well, we'd probably better stop there. I think we'll have a look. We'll have a read. Sorry, I wasn't reading terribly well, but we'll pause there and we'll pick that up next week. Let's just have a look at some of your comments. The same is happening in the Philippines. Sounds like a Gestetner printing machine turbo. I'm not quite sure what you're writing in water. Writing in water to have fleeting impact, not lasting, says Edward Moulding. I'm obviously missed the stream. Fred Dibner was big on this type of mill. Hi, Richard. Dear Richard, the flaws in reading merely add character. If we wanted perfect pronunciation and no errors, we would merely switch to an audiobook. We listen to you for your character and flaws, so that's very kind of you, Ed. I just wish I could do it more fluently because it would just be easier to listen to. Bell Broughton is a real elite place, is it? Jeff Kellison says, I'm sorry, I'd love to have visited before. Christian Soldier says, please tell me you don't have Walmarts in England. They kill all local grocery and retail shops. We don't have Walmarts, but Walmart's bought up Asda, which we do have. So, yeah. We do have the equivalents, as Morton Lewis quite rightly says. Walmart, yeah, Asda, oh yeah, there we go. The Ock Mill is now part of a big restaurant chain. Is it really? Yeah, that's interesting. Hackpen Hill always guaranteed a crop circle yearly. Is it the farmer? I mentioned this in the podcast when somebody said, oh, you should go to Hackpen Hill because there's a crop circle to look at. And it just made me wonder what the farmer thinks of his crops being ruined by these people that make the crop circles. He must, I suppose, he's taking a slight cut in his income. But if it's all spring barley, it probably doesn't matter because he's being paid by subsidies anyway. Here in Spain, there is El Corte Ingalls, but it is an old-fashioned and Spanish-only supermarket. Thank God we still have small and medium-sized units. Meat is still bought in from a guy on a scooter. A fine elegy for a bygone age, says Morton Lewis. The thing is, you know, what I can't get over, what I struggle with, and why people think, I'm always got rose-tinted glasses and all of this sort of nonsense that they always accuse anybody that looks back at these days and says, "Oh, weren't they? There was something about them." It is that it's only 80 years, and 100 years probably, because he's talking about things in the 40s. It's such a short space of time to lose industry that the modern innovations come in, and industry and automation has taken away a pride that people had in their work, a love, an opportunity to do these things. And I think not everybody will want to be doing craft work. Not everybody would want to go into the fields and do things just be one with nature perhaps, or work with wood and understand what wood is. Not everybody would want to do that, but because the industries are not there, the opportunity is not there. I mean, I was watching a thing online today talking about where will the next generation of farmers come from. Well, unless we have a way that people can become farmers, and speaking to Lee Dallon and from Strood Farm, you're saying you can't be a farmer unless unless you're rich to begin with. You need hundreds of thousands of pounds in the bank so that you can become a farmer. Well, how many people have that? And I'm selling my dad's house with the thought of trying to buy a small parcel of land, not so much to be a farmer to make a profit from it, but to grow some stuff to eat, but also to experience for myself and not go on a course somewhere else, but to challenge myself to grow a meadow, to scythe a meadow, to make a hay stack, and so on and so forth, and to grow some old-fashioned crops and have sheep on the land and all that. But I can't find anywhere that is to buy a bit of land, because it's farm agricultural land is very expensive now. It's gone up. So, there was a time when it was relatively cheap, but it's gone up gone up because the big farmers can just chuck the chemicals on and have the things like the arable stuff and grow and make a big killing, even though it will ruin the soil and there is no nutrients or minerals in that whatsoever. And people just don't have the opportunity now, because I'm not saying it's wrong that we shouldn't have mechanized ways of doing things and that we should use technology to our advantage. Of course we should. It'd be stupid to go backwards and not take with us what we have. But I feel that we've just thrown the baby with the bathwater. We're not keeping some of those things that have made our lives happy, and being proud of what you do when you have to work to earn a living, or that you have to do something. If you don't get that satisfaction, why are we here? Because you may as well just, what's the point? You may as well just kill yourself, mightn't you? Because if you've got nothing to actually live for, why live? Just doesn't make any sense. And I think there are loads of people who are craving something, and that actually they would give up the call centre or whatever it is they're living in, sitting behind a desk, to get out there and do some manual work and feel the sun on their brow, the rain on their back, and to utilise their hands and feel actually alive and useful and have a purpose in their life, instead of, hello, yes, have you got a computer problem? How can I help you? Or, oh, can I sell you some insurance? Or whatever the stupid things that, so it's so it's not something that I, as a, you know, when you ask a child, I mean, this is what we've lost. You know, when you ask a child and you say to a child, what would you like to be when you grow up? And they might say, I'll be an engine driver, or I want to fly aeroplanes. There's a magic in what they want to do because they see something that is exciting and thrilling. What they don't say is, I want to work in a call centre. They don't say that, do they? Kids don't want to do that. I want to be a dustbinman. Well, a dustbinman would probably be better than working in a call centre, to be honest with you. But you know what I mean? They don't say the things that most likely they're going to end up being. And whereas, you see, this is, again, another thing that sort of confuses me is we think we're all sophisticated and clever and we live in this modern world. And yet we've made this world pretty intolerable for a lot of people. You think, well, why have we done that? Why have we made it so intolerable? We've made life so easy that actually we've got no motivation to do anything. So many hours being thrown up on agricultural land. Oh, so many houses. Sorry, I misread that. So many houses. Yes, well, the worst thing is that we are building on the prime land that we should be giving that land to. And of course, all those houses have no bloody gardens. They have no bloody gardens or spaces. I mean, it's... You know, what are we doing? And we're sitting, mind you, we're all sitting here and just going, oh, well, what can you do? What can you do? I'm as guilty as the next one, apart from going out and trying to make some films and talking about it. But most people just shrug because they don't know what else to do. Most people will know that the crap they eat from the supermarkets has no nutrition in it. But what will they do? They don't go to customer service and say, actually, have you got any milk from a local farm, from a dairy that's fed on grass rather than silage, that actually the cows are out on the grass at least 6 to 8 months a year rather than all inside and automatically milked? Have you got any milk from that? Because if 100,000 or 500,000 people started to say, well, I'm not buying that other milk that you give us, I want milk from dairy farms that have all this, suddenly the supermarkets would be talking to the dairy farmers going, any chance you could put your cows outside because our customers want this? The power is with us collectively. Individually, they'll just tell you to get lost. So the milk's on the shelf, mate. You're just a number, like with utilities. But if everybody says, actually, I want my internet to work 100% every day, and we all did that, or we're not going to use it at all. We're not just going to put up with the not quite good enough. And actually, when you talk to me, address me by my name, not by my account number. I want a bank manager who knows my business, who shares my enthusiasm. I don't want somebody who goes, oh, sorry, you only can talk to us between these hours and all the rest of it. We've allowed this all to happen. We just allow it because we are all just uncollectively, we're just nothing. And that's how we're treated. Oh, anyway, there's a bit of a rant for you. You do not have to have rose-coloured glasses. You care about what's happening now and down the road. It's true. I mean, I care about it. But you just have to be careful now. You're not careful. You just have to take the flak, because if you care about what's going on, people just think you're a numpty and say you've got rose-tinted glasses and you know everything because you just read a couple of books and that's it. Go and work on a farm and know what it's like. Like, that's the answer. Indeed, a short space of time, there are still people living who can remember parts of my area in the southeast of London be covered in farms and fields. Yes, I mean, this is the crazy thing, you know, parts of London. You think all of London was at one point very countrified. Anyway, never heard of a food dehydrator. Oh my God, what the hell is that? I started using a local farm shop. To me, it takes 45 minutes to get there, but it's a nice bus ride. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to find a farm shop that's actually... I mean, there's one down the road that Julia and I went to the other day, and I looked at the food and I thought, do you know, I just think you've got the same delivery that the supermarket at the back of my house has. The packaging was the same and the branding was the same on some of the items. And I thought, I want to see a farm... I want to see a network of farms local to me that supply the shop, so I know that the beef is well fed on grass, not and treated well, and we just need to demand this. Anyway, I've gone on. Amazon will take over our postal Royal Mail. Well, you know, everything's through Amazon. Is it because we're all lazy, aren't we? We've just been made to become lazy. You know, you can't blame human nature, really, I suppose. You can't blame human nature, because we will take, like water, we will take the route of least resistance. And it will be our downfall, which is why water goes off a cliff, I suppose. Anyway, there we go. My house was built on a farm in 1935. But it's not the farmhouse. Yeah, I know. We're all on somebody's farm, aren't we? Anyway, thank you very much. I'll do a video of my local farm shop, supporting the local producer. Yeah, well, can you, as an allotment grower, can you not supply? I mean, all these allotments, can they not supply a shop? If farmers won't do it, why can't all the allotment people grow stuff? You know, if there's, I don't know how many allotment sites there are in my area around Worthing, but let's say there's 10 great big allotment fields. Could they not supply a farm shop local to Worthing? If the farmers won't do it, if somebody else started to do it, the farmers will go, hang on a minute, we're missing a trick here. If we had a shop that the allotment grower says, well, you know, I generally have got more cucumbers than I know what to do with, and they supply, and other people were doing that, and suddenly people go, oh, we can just get them down at the so and so allotment shop. Well, if the farmers would soon go, wait a second, maybe if we could, because they just need a market. At the moment, the only market they've really got is a supermarket. But if there was another market, they might go, crikey, we could sell our stuff a little bit more expensive. We'll get more money, but it's the same price. Cut out what the supermarkets take and the distribution and all of that crap, and they'd actually make more money per item, and we'd get local food. The book is very interesting and brings up a lot of coherent points. That's right. Anyway, you can't even give food away to local food bank. They won't take it. Well, they're stupid, aren't they? They're just stupid. You know more than those who don't read books. Thank you very much. Yeah. Anyway, I must go. Thank you very much for listening. Have a good weekend. We'll pick up where we left off, have more rants. Thank you for watching, for commenting, for listening on the podcast. If you've got through it all, it's been fascinating. And I'm sorry I get a little bit passionate about this. I feel like I'm a rat in one of those mazes looking for the way out and going, there's got to be a way out of this. This can't be it. This cannot be it. We cannot just live like this. There's got to be some route out. And the more you read and the more you think about things, the more the feeling of injustice starts to overpower me. Anyway, look after yourselves, and you can't beat a good 8 p.m. rant. Looking forward to it. I've probably got it out my system by then. Anyway, take care. Good afternoon. Thanks for watching, and thanks for listening. Take care. And bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.